At the start of the year 2000, a teenage boy named Eben and his father frequently went hunting in the Georgia backcountry. When Eben turned 14, his father became friends with a wealthy landowner who granted them access to one of his premier private hunting areas. A few days later, on October 5th, Eben and his father decided to take him up on the offer. They woke up very early, drove to the edge of this fenced-in property, and approached a main gate where they had the combination given to them by the owner. They entered the combination, opened the gate, drove in, shut and locked the gate, and then continued down the access road. They followed this road for about 2 miles until it ended just outside a vast forest. They parked their truck, got out, put on their gear, and began hiking into the woods in the pre-dawn darkness. Although they were mainly there to hunt, Eben and his father secretly enjoyed hiking and camping, extending their hunting trips whenever possible, even if the hunting was poor. Based on their experience spending so much time in the woods together, they immediately sensed that something was seriously off in this forest. There were no birds or animals. It was completely silent. The only sound they heard that wasn't from them was a plane passing overhead. Despite finding the situation strange, they assumed that since it was a private property with few visitors, maybe the animals had scattered upon their arrival. They eventually reached the hunting stand the owner had mentioned. They settled in, hoping to spot some animals, but the entire day passed without seeing or hearing a single one. It was completely silent. Frustrated, they packed up their gear, climbed down from the stand, and looked for a spot to camp for the night. Eben's father suggested moving deeper into the woods, hoping for better luck the next day. They hiked for about an hour further from where they had parked and found a clearing perfect for camping. They set up their tent, and with some daylight left, Eben's father suggested trying their luck again to see if any animals were nearby. They hiked a bit further, set up their blind, but again saw nothing and heard nothing. It was completely quiet. They turned back towards their campsite. As soon as they saw their campsite, they noticed that their tent had collapsed. Eben's father thought it must have been the wind, but Eben disagreed, pointing out that the day had been eerily silent with no wind or weather disturbances. Eben's father then asked if Eben had set up the tent correctly, but Eben was confident he had, as he had done it many times before. Upon closer inspection, they saw that the 2 rods that formed an X over the tent and anchored at 4 points on the base had been removed from the 4 corners. They knew that tents work on tension and that once the rods were anchored, they don't just pop out. Removing them required effort, either breaking the rod or manually taking them out. The strangest thing was that none of the rods were broken, which left them with the unsettling realization that someone must have tampered with their tent. They dismissed the idea of someone tampering, thinking it couldn't be possible on this private property. Convincing themselves that they must have somehow failed to set up the tent properly, they rebuilt it, made a fire, and chatted for a while before going to bed. They extinguished the fire, got into the tent, and fell asleep. A couple of hours later, Eben woke up suddenly, unsure if he was dreaming, but he thought he heard someone laughing a couple of 100 meters behind their tent. He instinctively checked to make sure his dad was still in the tent with him, and he was. Listening intently, he heard only silence, so he convinced himself he had been dreaming and eventually went back to sleep. Later, Eben woke up again, but this time his dad was already awake, looking around anxiously. Eben asked what was going on, and his dad shushed him, asking if he could hear that. Eben listened and was horrified to hear the laughter again, but this time it was coming from the opposite direction and was much closer. Eben quietly told his dad that he had heard the laughter earlier. Eben's father then revealed that the property owner had assured them no one else would be around. They hoped the laughter would stop. But unfortunately for them, it didn't. They heard footsteps running towards them from deep in the forest, coming to a stop, right at the edge of their clearing. Eben clung to his father, who held onto his rifle, ready to confront whatever was out there. Just as his father reached for the tent zipper, the laughter stopped. They didn't hear any footsteps, but they knew that something was still out there, as the laughter had ceased when they made noise. Evan's father froze, debating whether to go outside or not. Before he could decide, whatever or whoever it was turned, and ran back into the woods. For several minutes, they sat in total silence, hoping it was gone for good. When they heard nothing further, Evan's father re-zipped the tent and they both sat in stunned silence. Eben and his father stayed up all night, barely speaking, afraid to make any sound that might attract the mysterious intruder. As soon as the sun rose, they quickly packed up and ran out of the forest, checking over their shoulders all the way back to their truck. To this day, Eben and his father have no idea of who or what was out there with them. They naturally told the property owner about the strange experience they had, but he insisted that it wasn't possible, as the property was gated and monitored by cameras. No one else had entered or left during their time there.